Welcome back. Look at you, got me at the front of my seat. Welcome back to
I'll sit back and you sit forward.
A unsettled counterculture. Look at that.
Yes. Okay. What are we doing, Andrew? I'm going to sit back.
No, you can't. We're in 1 Thessalonians. We're in chapter 3. Right? We're talking about, we just spent the last episode, we just talked about this idea of being unsettled and when it should move us, when it should motivate us, when it should do something, what it means. Right? You gave some great insight to that whole thing. But in verses 2, 3, 4, right? There's this middle section that I really wanted to key in because we actually have pastors and people who are preaching totally the opposite, right? So I want you to read this section again so we get the context for those people who are not keeping up with us. Shame on them. But if
I try not to shame people because that's my doctrine.
Right. So
try not.
I will shame you.
You
and
shame them, and I'll help you with get up out of it. There you go.
Here we go.
Perfect storm.
There you go.
For the low price of $100 an hour.
We team up so well together.
So when we could stand it no longer, we thought it best to be left by ourselves in Athens. We sent Timothy, who is our brother and God's fellow worker, in spreading the gospel of Christ to strengthen and encourage you in your faith, so that no one would be unsettled by their trials. You know quite well that we were destined for them. In fact, when we were with you, we kept telling you that we would be persecuted, and it turned out that way, as you well know. Mm-hmm. For this reason, when I could stand it no longer, I sent to find out about your faith. I was afraid that in some way the tempter might have tempted you, and our efforts might have been useless.
So in the middle of these bookends, right, about the fact that when they could stand it no longer, right, when we could and when I could stand it no longer, we sent to check up on you. But in the middle of this is this whole little section about affliction, right? The fact that Paul was worried that him being afflicted was going to affect the faith of these people, and then their affliction would affect their own faith, right? And Paul says something very interesting here. We were destined, I think your version said, destined for affliction, right? And then he says, in fact, we were, right? So my version says appointed to affliction, right? But there's this concept out there amongst people, pastors, teachers, that listen, God's never, ever, ever going to let you be afflicted. Right? That if you're not healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? If your family's not in good order, you're doing something wrong. You've done something wrong, right? But this idea that there's just, in the Christian life, there shouldn't be this affliction, right, is a pretty commonplace thing. And we tend to even look at each other in that mode, right? Like, man, their life is just such a mess. So, first of all, talk to me a little bit about this concept of affliction, maybe your take on how God uses affliction, right? Maybe what he's trying to accomplish with it. But then this idea that Paul says, when we were appointed, you knew it, and then it happened.
A couple things come to mind. One is, Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. Anybody that tells you that you're not going to have trouble as a believer is lying to you. If they tell you that you're going to have trouble and that Jesus will help you through it, then they're telling you the truth.
Okay.
If you come to Christ, and I've told people this, some people are not going to like it when you come to Christ. The enemy's not going to like it, but there's going to be other people in your life that do not like it because they don't like the change that's happening in you.
Yep.
You know, I was looking up a scripture when you talked about this, is from Psalm 119. Verse 67, before I was afflicted, I went astray, is one way that it's said. Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I obey your word. We were talking about discipline earlier this morning, the difference between discipline and punishment. Discipline is designed to keep us from hurting ourselves and to help us to become who we need to be, which discipline's an interesting word, something I am not very disciplined at. We talk about disciplines, they're practices.
Right, yep.
But discipline is also God's practice of correction.
Right.
Punishment can do that as well, but punishment usually, it's more consequence driven than this is what you get for what you did, as opposed to discipline is, I'm going to help you so that you don't. Now, can punishment be discipline? It's a wasted punishment, if we don't let it discipline us. I tend to think of punishment being, you made me mad, so I'm going to, you're going to get your butt beat or whatever, okay? And discipline says, I don't want you to do this again. And so here are the consequences. You are going to get punished, but it is not to tear you down. It is so you don't do it again.
Yeah, I think in math we're always talking about, are all squares quadrilaterals? Yes, but are all quadrilateral squares? No. Right? So in this, is all discipline punishment in nature? No.
No.
But is all punishment discipline in nature? Yes.
It should
right?
be.
All punishment can be used to discipline,
Yeah,
but
right.
there is discipline without punishment.
Yeah, and there's punishment without discipline.
Right. So we look at the concept and I like the road that you're going down on that whole thing, because how we view affliction matters, right? There are people out there that would say, God, we were talking about last night in my Bible study, we were talking about this issue, and we were talking about, is God evil? The answer is no, God is not evil. Does God use evil? Well, sure, God uses evil to do things with, right? So again, God disciplines and he will send affliction, right? I think the Bible's pretty clear. You might disagree with me, but I think the Bible's pretty clear, especially in the Old Testament, in a cause and effect idea. Hey, if you sin, you're going to be disciplined, right? So sometimes God says, I'm going to let affliction come on you via pestilence and plagues and no rain, and I'm going to let the wild animals tear you up, and I'm going to let all kinds of things. God's going to use, right? Like bad things are going to be allowed to happen to you, right? So there's this idea that sometimes affliction happens because we're doing bad things and God's going to discipline. Sometimes affliction happens via Job, right? Sometimes we're not doing anything and God just allows affliction to happen. I didn't do any sin, right? And my car got a flat tire. Or it just happens. You get a flat tire, and sometimes God just allows that to happen.
I'm sure I've stated it either on Chasing the Wind or on here, but I've certainly said it to my congregation. We want to see miracles happen. Mm-hmm. We want to see God perform a miracle, as long as I'm not the one that needs the miracle.
Yep.
We want to see God miraculously heal someone, as long as I'm not the one who needs the healing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And sometimes that miraculous healing, that miracle, that healing, that deliverance comes when it comes to us. That God shows, I'd love to show you how my power. How about on you?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. Do it on Andy. Yeah. That's really cool. How God is so good to you. Don't we want God to be good to us? It's like we were talking the other day in a group I was in. We were talking about the fruit of the Spirit is one of them is patience. And how many times have we heard it said, I'm sure I've said it, don't pray for patience, you might just get it. God will give you more than you can, that'll cause you to. That's really not a good. We act like patience is not something we're supposed to have.
It's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing. But yeah, getting that is I remember Brendan, I think it was in Brendan Manning's book, Ruthless Trust, I think is where he shared the story of a guy that came to his priest and said, priest, he goes, Father, I want you to pray that God would make me a neurosurgeon. And the good father said, okay, let's go pray. And so they prayed, and the good father started praying, Lord, help my brother to understand that he needs to go to undergrad and get his pre-med degree. Help my brother understand that he needs to again go on to med school. Help my brother understand that he needs to go on. It was enough to say, we want it right now.
Yeah. No.
We want it right now. And sometimes God says, that healing takes place through a doctor, through surgery. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't count. So, somewhere along the line, God allowed somebody, gifted somebody to be a doctor. Luke was a doctor.
Yeah. Nope.
You know? So when we tend to think, why me, Lord? Why me? And God says, why not you? Why are you so special, Andy, that you should not have to deal with some stuff? We live in Western New York. I am dealing with allergies right now, and
Snow all winter,
and we deal with stuff, and you end up rolling your truck, that you didn't want to roll, and now you got a car payment. It's like, God, why? He goes, well, things happen.
Again, this whole concept is that Paul's concerned that this affliction is going to cause them to lose their faith. Right?
Yeah.
We definitely have this problem in our churches today that a little bit of affliction weeds out a whole bunch of people really quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet Paul says to them, not only did we tell you we were going to have affliction, it happened. Right? So again, my friend Bill Ballesteri said something last night. He's like, we need to tell people the gospel. Then he paused and said, the whole gospel, right? Which is that, yes, for God so loved the world that he saved his only begotten son, right? That's great. But we also need to teach the parts that you said, that Jesus said, in this world you're going to have trouble.
And yet here's the part, I've heard this so many times, people, when they do have a little affliction in life. Well, I've asked the Lord if there's some sin in my life. And I can't think of anything, so I don't know. They see it as punishment. They see affliction as punishment. Maybe God's saying, you're getting a little flabby in this area, so I'm going to tighten the reins a little bit on you and withhold a little bit so that you're getting off track here. So I'm going to use this. You understand this. You're a plow jockey. So people will ask me, how do you get your lines straight in when you're mowing your yard or when you're plowing a field?
Mowing hay.
Okay, how do you do it?
Yep.
Well, you have a couple ways that you can do it. If you want a pattern, you can follow the sidewalk or you can follow the fence line. But when I go get the mower from the church, and I live near my church, I cut across this big meadow, what I do is I line the mower up and I find something that I'm going to drive toward. And I do not look at the ground. I look at what I'm driving at.
Yep, drive straight.
You drive toward it. Now, then I can turn around after I've mowed that line. I can turn around and look and say, okay, well, I got off a little bit. I can correct it then on the next pass.
Yep.
Of course, then the old story goes about the farmer that was teaching his kid to do that. And he said, you just pick something, son, across there, and you drive the team toward him. And he drives the team of horses toward him, and his dad comes back later, and every row is going that way. It's curved. And he goes, what happened? He goes, I found the cow, and he was walking that way, okay? Don't follow the cow. Find something solid and stationary. In our case, it's Jesus.
Yeah, amen.
It's Jesus. Can we get distracted? Absolutely.
Yes.
And sometimes distracted in a good way. That, I used to go to the gym and people said, why'd you quit? I said, because I reached all my fitness goals. Well, those got shot down really quick, and I was back. So we go to the doctor and the doctor says, your cholesterol's high or you're close to being diabetic or whatever the case is. You need to make some changes. Well, that's not very nice. I'm going to go find me another doctor.
Yeah,
and people will do that.
Sure.
Or do we sit here and say, well, the doctor offended me when they said that? No. Good. I'm glad you're offended. When I read this book, it will offend me. It's going to say, Mark, you are not being very forgiving.
Yeah.
You're being a little judgmental. You're gossiping a little bit. You're griping about that person. No, God, I'm not gossiping. I'm sharing prayer requests. We can disguise, but God says, Mark, really?
Yeah.
Really?
I love the dramatic pause.
Yeah.
Because he gives us a moment.
Yeah, really?
You really want to go through
I
this?
want you to think about this.
Yep.
Why don't we talk about it later? I want you to sit with this for a bit. Oh.
That's a terrible, terrible place to be with God. I'm not excited about those moments where he's like, okay, we'll come back to this.
Yeah.
No, I want to be done with it.
Yeah. And then we can come back in humility and say, okay, what do we need to do here? Okay, well, here's what we're going to do about this.
I love what you said last time, and then we worked it in this time as well. Right there are times where God has us unsettled, because we need to make some changes or we need to do something.
Right.
It's an action unsettledness.
Right.
There are other times where God makes us unsettled, and it's not because we're doing something wrong or somebody's doing something wrong. He's just trying to show us
He's
something.
putting a burden on us.
Right.
Sometimes
He's trying to show us what he's doing, where he's doing it, how he's doing it. Being able to understand, I am one that tends to lean more towards the all discipline is punishment, right? Like I'm always waiting for the punishment. I'm not really sure why I grew up that way because it wasn't that way, but I have a really hard time with that with God. It feels like you're being punished all the time.
Yeah.
And God frequently has to say to me, this isn't punishment, right? This is learning a discipline that,
right?
Yesterday, was in a moment where I went by a place where there was an accident. And I realized that somebody, right, that I care greatly about was just before me and could have been in that accident. And you're looking at that moment and you're going, holy cow, discipline of seconds. It matters. How many times have we had those moments where you realize, like if I hadn't paid attention, you hear all these tornado stories and things like that. And people who, like they were going to go here, but they didn't for some reason. And the whole building's gone, right? There's something, bless you. There's something that we benefit from with this whole idea of discipline. Like, listen, be where I need you to be. And then we get those tangible results sometimes.
Well, and is that not one of the first things we do when we can down in Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri? This is the proper way to say it, by the way. All these tornadoes. Well, there must be some sin in there. I heard that. I mean, I've heard that for years. Well, this area got hit because of all the sin in that area, or because they did this. Okay, maybe.
Sure.
Or maybe they live in a spot where there's tornadoes. Well, it must be all those people in Oklahoma are a bunch of sinners. If you're from Oklahoma, I don't feel that way, by the way. But, or it could be they live in Tornado Alley and tornadoes happen. And so we act like, it was, so when I flipped my truck, back in November after the first snow, I probably got a little overconfident. I've been driving in the snow my life. All of a sudden, boom. Well, is there sin in my life? No. Sometimes you just hit a slick spot in the road and things happen.
Yep.
And God says, okay, well, what are we going to do with this? Because God doesn't waste a crisis. And He's okay, what am I going to do with this?
If you live in Tornado Alley and your whole process is, well, I'm just going to pray and God's just going to keep me from ever being affected by a tornado, that might work.
Yeah.
But you might also want a safe shelter place too at the same time because God might decide, I'm going to let the tornado come.
Yeah.
And you might need to prepare. We just need to be for both sides. And I read this section last night and realized, we actively preach against this in many different ways. If you live a life that's worthy of it, you will never have affliction. Right? We live we say things that just aren't necessarily true. It's all encompassing. God can do whatever He wants to do.
And so what's coming to my mind is a dear brother passed away several years ago. And he was a retired Nazarene pastor in my church, and he and his wife were just peaches to saying to me, his best years of ministry were the last couple of years he was alive. And I remember he was full of cancer and praying, God, don't take him. But that was heaven is not a punishment. Heaven is not a punishment.
We view it that way, don't we?
But, it'd be very easy to say, well, he was so faithful and he was a godly man. Why did he have to do this? And yet, what does Paul say in Philippians? I want to know Christ and His suffering.
But we don't want that part.
We don't want that. We don't want to know Christ, but we want to know all the good parts. But we don't understand that you pray that you don't get to stop. Yeah. We say, and is that where sometimes, when God has said to me, when I'm whining to Him about God, they don't, these people don't want your word. What does it matter? He goes, they're not rejecting you, Mark. They're rejecting me. And now you know a little bit about what I go through.
There's the suffering.
There's the suffering. The suffering is not necessarily physical. It can be.
Yeah. God suffers a lot.
Yeah, and in many ways, yeah.
Well, let's leave it right there. That's lots and lots to chew on. And we managed probably some self, what's that? Self
therapy.
Yeah. Some conviction.
Yeah,
some
there you go. Yeah, whatever, how we want to call it.
Well, we will let you chew on that. We'll see you next time right here on Counterculture.
Grace and peace.